to worry. Worry about a thing. Hold on. You can make it. Hold on. Everything.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. Clark Reports. I'm your host, Dr. Gary Clark, and my guest is my friend, Mr. Skrmetta, who is the chairman of the board of the Louisiana State Public Service Commission, the Louisiana Public Service Commission. Yes, sir, and greetings and welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, and thanks for inviting me today.
Yes, and the Louisiana Public Service Commission is wide and expansive, and by far it is one of the most important commissions that we have in the state, and they're all elected positions, and you serve as chair of the commission. Would you please tell my viewing audience the nature and duties of yours and your responsibilities as chair of the Louisiana Public Service Commission?
Sure, Dr.
Yes,
Clark,
sir.
it'd be my pleasure. You know, the Public Service Commission is a constitutional body. We're actually found, you can find us in Article 4 of the state constitution. And a lot of people who are involved with the commission refer to us as the fourth branch of government. And we've got our own sort of legislative component, we've got our own judicial component, and we've got our own executive component to what we do. So we're a one-stop shop in how we deal with the issues we deal with. And the things we deal with are mostly associated with non-municipal services. So we regulate electricity, natural gas, water, wastewater, telephone communications. We also regulate a lot of things in transportation, taxi cabs, tow trucks, limousines, buses in excess of 12 seats. We do some regulation in pipeline tariffs. And in many ways, the commission functions predominantly as a financial and analyst component to make sure that ratepayers get the best services they can for the lowest amount of money. In fact, you know, I take great pride in the fact that when I took office 6 years ago, the Louisiana had about, we're in the lowest rates in the country, we're about 24. And now we're fourth lowest in the country, and realistically the difference between 1 and 4 is very fractional. So we're sort of in a four-way tie for the lowest rates in the country. And I think that's in stark contrast to where you look at gas prices are double what they were when I came in. We've managed to actually lower electricity rates and look at credits and savings back to ratepayers. We've saved over $4 billion just in the last 6 years. So it's been a really interesting time to work with the commission and work for the consumer.
Now, Commissioner Skrmetta, you serve as chair, and we have five distinct districts. You represent District 1.
Yes, sir.
What are the boundaries of District 1?
District 1 starts just east of Denham Springs, Louisiana, in Livingston Parish. And it goes all the way to the Pearl River, so all of the North Shore, and it goes from the northern part of the North Shore at the Mississippi border to the mouth of the river. So comprise components of Livingston Parish, Tangipahoa, St. Tammany, Washington, St. Bernard, Plaquemine, Orleans, Jefferson, a little bit of St. Charles, and Ascension.
And that is a rural district to some extent, and also suburban. Yes.
Correct.
And what do your constituents say to you when they come in, when you see them, and they say, and I know the key word, I'm going to write it down. The key word for me is always rate. Right. but what do your commissioners, or do your constituents say to you when you see them in the community, or they come to a meeting or whatever?
Well, you know, we have town hall meetings every month, and our town hall meetings are essentially. By November, we'll have had 70 town hall meetings in my term. And we meet with consumers, and if there are big issues, we have big issue speeches. If there are individual problems, we sit down with individuals and treat it as a sort of satellite office meeting, just so we can meet with people who can't make it to our office to have discussions. For the most part, I think people are, they understand where their rate structure is. Our problems seem to come from where small, unique problems hit. And, you know, everything from there was a lady with a small child that required certain medical equipment but did not notify the utility company that she had a child on medical equipment, and somehow her electricity got turned off and the child was put in some danger, and we were informed of it immediately. Within 15 minutes we were able to get the power back on. I mean, from something as drastic as that, as, you know, we've had some people who have had issues with, you know, how their account is laid out, their you know, bills go to wrong addresses, So we have a wide variety of issues that we deal with on a consumer level every day in our office, and we work very aggressively to work with the consumer to address whether they have a question or whether they have a real problem. So we work aggressively to fix that.
And I know you have a call in where they can call you directly as
Absolutely.
well. Yes.
And any consumer that wants to meet me, I work for them. So, we meet with everybody.
Now, you say 70 town hall meetings within your district or around the state?
Within my
large?
district.
Oh, that is amazing.
So we,
Yes.
originally when I took office, we had 12 parishes, and so it worked out fine because we had one a month, and we had, we just rotated it. After the 2010 census, we had redistricting, and so we've been reduced from 12 parishes to all or part of 11 parishes, and the population in my district is about just under 1 million people. All the commissioners have populations that are around the just short of 1 million people mark. That's how we sort of do our zones in our districts. But that's how we got to that amount.
And then you meet once a month in Baton Rouge.
We meet monthly in Baton Rouge. Sometimes, when the opportunity allows, we move the meeting to local jurisdictions in each commissioner's district to have an opportunity. So we've had them in Crowley, we've had them in Winfield, we've had them in Bossier, we've had them in Natchitoches, we've had them in Lafayette, we've had them in Covington, we've had them in Metairie, we've had them in New Orleans. So we periodically over the last 6 years, we've had a few road shows that we've taken on. So we had one this year in Bossier, and we may have another one in New Orleans in October.
What I like about that is a sense that is that all the meetings are not just held in one central location. Everyone does not have to just come to Baton Rouge, but you all go out and you have an opportunity to see the state. Do you find that the issues differ in terms of the southern part of the state or northeastern part of the state when the constituents come?
Well, I think that it goes from the common to the unique, and we have the sort of the general comments is people are very concerned about their rates going up, and we have very little activity on rates going up. In fact, we've been managed to get them to go down, and we've put in other cost savings measures. It goes from that to very local and unique issues. Some issues over the hydroelectric facility in Vidalia, some issues over the Ouachita water systems. There's some issues over in Bossier about some of their sewer plants. So it actually gives an opportunity for folks on a local level to come out and see what's going on.
And also issues with the telephones with the prison systems.
Absolutely,
right,
and
the
we've had significant issues about that. Because what folks need to understand about the prison telephone issue is that inmates basically are paying for their own services. The Constitution allows for inmates to receive housing, food, and access to their attorney. Everything else that's inside of a jail system is funded by revenue. And so the sheriffs or jailers or even the federal system receive revenue from these phone rates through these companies, and they use it for reentry programs, education programs, improvement on access to attorneys and paralegals to work with inmates. But it's self-funded by the inmates and their associates, whether it be their family or friends. If that wasn't the case, then the sheriffs would have really very little, they would have to go to the public and ask for tax increases. If those services wanted to be continued, the taxpayer would determine whether or not they would be done. So in many ways, the services other than what's constitutionally provided for in the prison system are largely funded by themselves, by the inmates and their friends and families.
Well, there's one concern that I have, and it's more in terms of how do you operate and deal with the multitude and the diversity, should I say, of the constituents that you serve. On one dimension, you have the average consumer, such as myself. And then on the other hand, you have the professionals who come in.
Right.
And how do you balance that? Yes.
Well, my whole philosophy since I've taken office is to find that balance. And the nice thing about having legal training is you understand the search for the balance in a decision. And what we look at, and I think all commissioners look at, we want companies to be functional. We want them to cover their costs. We want them to actually earn a reasonable profit, and they're entitled to under U.S. Supreme Court rules. They're entitled to a reasonable profit. And what we want to make sure is two things. We want to make sure companies only earn a reasonable profit and not a usury profit. And we do that through audit. And the other thing we want to make sure is that, you know, a healthy company provides really good services for the consumer. So we want to make sure that you're not just spending your buck, but you're getting the best value for your dollar. And that's the thing that you look at. And when we find that consumers don't get value for what they spend, that's when we go in and investigate things. If we find that we actually found that with one company that was paying a telephone company for 10 years for a line and found out that the building had been torn down 12 years before. So we were able to get credits back for that company because they had been paying the bill on that line for 12 years and that it had been sort of not in existence. You get from extremes like that to problems with backflow valves on sewer lines and just a variety of things that, you know, ultimately the goal is companies have to exist because services have to be provided. But what we make sure is the consumer gets the value, they get good services and value for their dollar. And, you know, Louisiana is literally an example of how you can balance interests, how you can provide these services. Because if you look at other parts of the United States, they are paying a lot more for electricity and they're not getting the reliability and continuity of service that we can ensure that the public gets.
Well, you serve on a regulatory body, essentially.
Yes.
And on a regulatory body, is the temperament of service and leadership, I would think, is somewhat different than legislative or executive, because you actually serve as oversight.
Yes.
And so what is the temperament that you bring to this regulatory body? And as chair of all of these massive egos and more than egos, individuals who have separate and diverse goals.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because when you think about this, all 5 commissioners are very successful in their own way.
Precisely.
And they all have their own goals in life. And, you know, but at the same time, everybody on the commission has the same goal, which is to provide good services at low cost to consumers and to make sure that the companies function properly. Now, philosophy comes in on some sub-issues, but for the most part, even though there are different members of different parties and different philosophies, when you know that the goals are going to be the same and you know that the ultimate decisions are going to be the same, it's not as difficult as you might think to have a sort of commonality of thought. And we, you know, on some things, and it's very rare, we do have great divergence of thought, and we try to just accommodate it through discussion and opportunity for that.
And I think also that that in your position, one is forced, like governors, to be pragmatic, and like mayors to be pragmatic. And sometimes, as you've got to take the pragmatic choice. Is that not so?
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing that should be anything recognized as other than when a decision has to be made, you make the decision. You reason it, you try to do it, but if you get down to it and it calls for the decision, you make it. Look, I'm a big believer in the tallest tree catches the most wind. So if you stand up and you make decisions that you think are in the best interest of the folks you serve, then you have to make these decisions. I mean, ultimately, we don't work for the governor, we don't work for the judicial system, we don't work for the legislature. Every commissioner has a direct relationship back to the public, and we are the highest level elected official that is in charge of what we do. And so we have a great knowledge of responsibility back to the public, and we know that with that comes the responsibility to make decisions and make them on a reasoned basis.
Yes, and again, I would like to remind my viewers that I'm speaking with my friend Eric Skrmetta, who is the chairman of the Louisiana Public Service Commission. And yes, sir, I know you are a native of the city and you're from here, and you have a long and extensive history in our state. But will you please tell my viewing audience the Eric Skrmetta story?
Well,
Yes, sir.
real story. Well, you know, it's interesting. I was born at Baptist Hospital on uptown New Orleans, but my mom and dad had to drive there from Gentilly Woods. And I grew up on Press Drive for the bulk of my life. I lived in Press Drive from when I was born in 1958, and went to St. Gabriel's, the Archangel for school in Gentilly Woods for a little while. Ended up going to WCC Claiborne Public School for 2 years for 5th and 6th grade. My sister was taken ill when I got out of 6th grade, so I was put in boarding school for a year at St. Paul's in Covington for 1 year. And then when I came back, did 8th grade through 12th grade at Brother Martin High School. And after Brother Martin, went to LSU and got my degree in industrial education and technology. Went on to law school, got my my Juris Doctorate degree from Southern University Law School in Baton Rouge. And then after that, I went forward and went to Tulane and received my master's in maritime law. Life sort of discussions is, all my life I worked by myself and also with my family. My father was a great leader in the seafood industry in Louisiana and in the world, and I got a lot of experience from my dad, who there was no spring break and there was no weird things. There were weekends at the machine shop and weekends at the processing plant. So I got a real firsthand knowledge of work, because it was very, as a kid, when I was in college and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to be if I didn't go on to professional school. My dad put a shovel in my hand and I was shoveling ice at a shrimp plant for a while, and it didn't take too long to figure out that while it was an interesting job, I thought that I needed to enhance my education a little bit more. And so I decided that I'd always been intrigued by being an attorney, and I decided to go to law school. And then from that point on, I just, as I was an okay student, and okay in the sense that my high school told me, okay, you can leave. And college was a little difficult, to be perfectly honest, but I managed to get out. But when I got to law school, I became really engulfed by the understanding of the study of law. And I graduated cum laude from Southern University. I graduated 10th in my class. I should have graduated probably 3rd or 4th in my class, but I had pneumonia my last semester. But I went forward and I got my master's degree. And, at the moment, I'm considering studying for my PhD in maritime law at one of the international universities. So we're working it out to do it by distance learning through the United Nations. So, but I grew up in Louisiana as a Louisiana guy, and living in the city, I always had a lust for the outdoors. So while I understand concrete and structures, I really love to go out. And so, I go, I've gone hunting, I go duck hunting, I go fishing, I've gone, deer hunting, and I've always been a great shot. And the other night, we went, so one of my friends has a boat and invited me to go bow fishing with him, so I'd never done that before. And, just to experience what Louisiana has to offer, because a lot of people go, where are you going, for your vacation? I think there's plenty of stuff to do in Louisiana, so I'm very excited about all the things we get to do here. But, my life in New Orleans was my life in New Orleans until I got married. And my wife grew up in Jefferson Parish, and I think like a lot of men will understand where they sort of go to their wife's nest and not where you want to go sometimes. Oh, yes. I've been very fortunate to be blessed with a wonderful wife, and I have 2 extremely gifted children who scare me on how smart and intelligent and pretty they are. And I have a daughter who's 14 and a son who's 12. And it's just been, I've been most fortunate. And sometimes you recognize that do you try to become, what do you do? Do you try to serve the public, or do you just go retire? And for me, I was so blessed with the things I was successful at that the opportunity presented myself to be of service. And that's where I came into this, is I wanted to make a difference for, the public. I wanted my children to see the value of service. And I wanted them, and to make that difference in the community. So, from a kid who grew up on Press Drive in Gentilly Woods to the man I am today, I'm a product of every relationship and interactivity I ever had. So, I take the responsibility of that experience, and now I want to deliver what I can bring that value to the public. And that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
And to produce the individual that you are. But in that journey, who were your major influences, professional and personal?
Personally, it has to be my father. my dad went to Warren Easton. He actually moved to New Orleans when he was a child. He was born in Biloxi, and he grew up in Amelia, Louisiana, then Patterson, and then came to New Orleans when he was about 12 years old. Lived with his father. He went to Warren Easton, and he loved the city. As a child, he worked at Higgins. He ended up going into the Army Air Corps, but he always had his home in New Orleans. In fact, just a couple of blocks from here is where he had his first seafood plant over on Broad Street.
Oh,
and
yes.
then a couple of other blocks in the other direction is where he had his machine shop on Lower Line and Palm Street behind Xavier. But he taught me so much, and he taught me a lot of good things, and I learned a few things, to question some of the things your father does when you watch him. But as an individual, on a personal basis, as a family basis, there's no other choice. It's my dad. My mom's pretty close into it because my mom was brilliant. But on a sort of non-family relationship basis, I really came to understand a lot from two people. When I was a college student, I worked for Jimmy Fitzmaurice, the former lieutenant governor, and I learned a lot from the chief. And he was a great guiding light. Absolutely.
Yes.
And he taught me a lot about government. He really did. And he taught me a lot because he was a Democrat. I was a Republican since I was about 19. But I still absorbed everything I could learn from him. And he was a tremendous leader for the state. And I got a real value of the time I've known him. And I'm still very close to the chief today. And we still periodically go out and have dinner. And he's still, to this day, and he's in his 90s, he still gives me advice and tells me, are you doing okay? You're not doing okay? He challenged me when I first came into the commission about, being a leader. And, I took that advice to heart and I went with it. And since that time, I haven't veered away. One of my other great, impact or, individuals that I've known in my life was Patrick Taylor. And Patrick Taylor was the owner of the Taylor Industries. The Taylor, did natural gas and formed the Taylor Foundation and created the TOPS program. And I met Pat when he first conceptualized TOPS for the Tuition Opportunity Program, which is now the Taylor Opportunity Program. And he and I became fast friends. We were both interested in shooting, and we were both voracious attempts to try and be better marksmen. And but he and I became fast friends. In fact, he became my daughter's godfather because of the closeness of the relationship.
Close, yeah.
And he taught me things about understanding responsibility in business and understanding responsibility in service. And I've always tried to be a sponge for other people's knowledge because my theory in life is they didn't get old being silly. And they didn't get old being stupid. And you can learn a lot from someone who's older than you. In reality, there have been thousands of people that I've interacted with, and every single one of them have taught me something. But when you really narrow it down to a few people that made a difference in your life, they made a difference in my life. And I would add one is when I met my wife, she showed me how to be even smarter, and she actually improved my life by helping me understand possibilities in how you look at different problems. And she's been a great influence in my life as
yes,
well.
You have a pretty extensive view, an expansive view, should I say, of the state.
Yes, sir.
The greatest challenge that's confronting our state right now.
Well,
and when you look at
I think the biggest problem that we face as a state is that we've gotten to the point where we have allowed the central government of the state to become too expansive. And what that does is it just takes taxpayer money and it puts it into an infrastructure that may or may not be necessary. It's difficult for local folks in their local communities to get any traction if they got to go to Baton Rouge to get action. So if the decision makers are closer to the ground, if the parish officials are the ones who can make a difference in their life, then the state should divest itself of some of these authorities to give it back to the parishes. It says two things. It reduces the costs on the state budget, and it also puts the services and the decision makers closer to the public. Because I'm a big believer in a grass-up approach than a top-down approach to government. When Louisiana has a significant large government. The next governor is going to be faced with a budget that is greater than its revenue sources, and that there are decisions that have to be made. Now, you can try to Peter Paul a budget all you want, but at the end of the day, what you've got to do is like every other family in the state does. If you got so much money, that's how much you spend. And if you don't have the money, you know that you put yourself in jeopardy by borrowing. The government going on and doing payday loans effectively for itself is not a solution to a stable government. Now, we've got great opportunities in this state over the next 8 to 10 years. We have at least 5 new power plants that are going to be built. That's another.
That's great.
That's at least,
Yes.
and it's because of demand of coming industrials. Opportunities for work are going to increase in Louisiana. We've got a very large component, if not the bulk, of the European chemical industry wants to move to Louisiana for a couple of reasons. One is we have the right utility profiles. They want to come here because in Europe right now, especially in Germany, they're paying about 38 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. When I came into office, they were paying 17. Louisiana is right around 8.5 to 9. They also recognize that Louisiana is a pro-business state. So between the European chemical industry, which is 10 times larger than their automobile industry, and the California chemical industry, we have great opportunities for more employment in this state. So the solution to stabilization of a state government is a bigger economy, and an economy combined with a better management of what we call government at the state level. Because the more money we can leave in your pocket is the more money you spend, and the more money you spend at local businesses just gives the opportunity for an economy to thrive. If we take that money and put it into government, I know this is going to come as a surprise to everybody, but government does not produce a product. It does not produce a service other than servicing themselves to some degree. So what we need to do is remove redundancy from government, putting as much control back on the local level for the parish governments to have, and to enhance the quality of life for people by reducing the amount of tax. You might not be able to eliminate it, but I think there's a way to reduce the tax in this state to put more money in people's pockets so they can spend it how they want to on their family.
Well, in the remaining minute
Yes,
and a half that we have, your vision for the Public Service Commission
Well,
under your leadership.
Well, what I want to see the commission do is basically twofold. I would like to see us increase our activity in finding ways for the free market to come in and save folks money. We're in a free market electricity market now, which companies are responsible to buy electricity for less money that costs less than what they can produce it for. It's an immediate savings back. We need to expand that concept. We need to continue to work to enhance how we're going to get more communications services out to the folks. We have an opportunity that we're working on with new pipelines that may allow us to put in new broadband services. We've got loads of opportunities, including, how we deal with our litigation against the federal government.
Yes.
To make sure that the local ratepayers aren't impacted by that.
Yes, and again, I want to thank you for joining
Thank you
me.
very much, Dr.
It's
Clark.
been great.
It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, yes. And again, I want to thank my viewers for tuning in. As always, it's been a pleasure.